Hello Year 10. So today we are going to focus on writing a 20-minute exam style analysis on London that we annotated yesterday. But as always, we will begin thinking about our vocabulary. So, context. Remember, for A Christmas Carol and the anthology poetry, you must write about the context. Now, the context means why the writer chose to write it, how their decision to write the poem and their intentions links to their life, their beliefs, as well as what was going on at the time. So I'd like you to think back to the last couple of lessons. What information have you learnt last week, or this week in fact, about the context of the City of London and the time Blake was writing? Let's try and bullet point a couple of ideas about what you can remember about the context. It might be the type of poet Blake was, the sorts of things he believed in. So yesterday we looked at this idea of appalled. What quotation shows Blake is appalled by how controlled London is by the government? So look back at your notes from yesterday, recall the definition of appalled, and you can pause the video and answer those two questions. So sovereignty then. Sovereignty means supreme power or authority. Now we can imagine that this idea of any elite or rich power having sovereignty would be something that William Blake would not like. So why did Blake disagree with the sovereignty of the government? So again, pause the video and answer that final question. So in our last couple of lessons, we have learned that Blake was a romantic poet. That meant that they worshipped nature, were very anti and against the Industrial Revolution because of the effect it had on nature, as well as the division between the rich and poor. Despite many of them being quite affluent and wealthy, many of them did feel bitterly for the poor. Blake being one of the strongest sort of advocates for the poor, he particularly was against child labour and the exploitation of children. He was incredibly anti-authority. He was against the government, the monarchy, as well as the church, the organised church. Not because he wasn't Christian, he was deeply religious. William Blake believed from the age of 4 he saw visions of angels. He was a deeply religious man, but he had his sort of alternative religious beliefs. This idea of, you know, God as this eternal, gentle father that would welcome his children into heaven. He didn't believe that the teachings of Jesus should be used as an excuse for hatred and bigotry. Very much like the Ghost of Christmas Present says in A Christmas Carol, which some of you may have read. This idea when Scrooge questions the ghost about why shops and everything needs to be shut on a Sunday, and he says, well, you know, it's you, your brethren, he's obviously this idea that the ghost is sent from God. So he's essentially saying, well, you know, God tells us that this is what needs to happen. And the ghost launches into this brilliant sort of short monologue about how actually there are those upon the earth, i.e. the priests, popes maybe, who pretend to know the will of God, and that actually some of those people are as foreign to God, to the spirits, as anyone else. And so it's quite an interesting little criticism there that Dickens does of the organised church as well, which is again exactly how Blake believed, or what Blake believed. So he was very against the organisation of the church because he believed that they were corrupt and hypocritical. To be appalled by something is to be disgusted and horrified. So what quotation shows that Blake is appalled by how controlled London is by the government? We have this idea of the chartered streets and the chartered Thames, this idea of mind-forged manacles as well, these mental chains that, due to the lack of freedoms, the people almost put on themselves. So Blake disagreed with the sovereignty of the government because he believed that, again, the government were corrupt. They had no interest in helping the regular people of London, or in fact England. They were all about their own power and their own gain and their own status. Again, very similar to Priestley and very similar to Dickens. And we know that Blake wanted people, the regular people of England, to overthrow the government, the monarchy, in the same way the French had attempted to do in the French Revolution. So today we're going to analyse and evaluate how Blake presents the City of London, and we're also going to include that contextual information. So we're going to learn how to write an effective exam answer through developing the appropriate technique, and how to add in that contextual AO3 information, because you must link your analysis to the context. For those of you that did the hawk roosting and Ozymandias practice, that was, you know, in my two classes, the biggest issue, people not writing enough about the context. So what I'd like you to do quickly is pause the video and just bullet point 3 or 4 of Blake's key beliefs. These could be to do with him being a romantic poet, his views on the sovereignty of the government and monarchy in the church, etc. If you want to challenge yourself, begin to actually try and link some of those quotations into the poem itself. So you can pause the video and do that now. So some of the things you might have got: he was very anti-authority, that the government and monarchy abused their power, cared nothing for the needs of the people, was horrified by the poverty that existed, particularly child labour. Think the chimney sweeper's cry, the youthful harlot. Despite being a highly religious man, he was distrustful of the organised church. He felt they were corrupt. So that's this idea of the blackening church. And as he was a romantic poet, Blake believed in the power of imagination and creativity. Childhood is the ideal state. Children should stay innocent and childlike for as long as possible. You know, Blake did not approve of schools. He writes a poem in his Songs of Innocence about how schools essentially destroy the creativity of children, and children should be out playing in fields and not in dusty old schoolrooms. So Blake was not a fan of the education system either. They believed nature was something to be both worshipped and feared. So it's this idea of being in awe, really, of nature. They had a healthy respect and fear of nature as a powerful force as well. He was also very anti the Industrial Revolution. That was the rise of industry, factories. Think, you know, everything we learned when we studied An Inspector Calls about, you know, Mr. Burling, and this whole idea that a lot of people like Mr. Burling used the Industrial Revolution to make their personal wealth at the expense of the poor. And it was, you know, not just the effect on nature, the pollution, the smog in the cities, but also the poverty and inequality it created. So these are all, you know, London is a great poem to link to the context because there's loads and loads there. So, as always, when we are going to do a small assessment, you need to select your quotations. Now, generally, we know that we should aim for at least 3 or 4 quotations in 20 minutes. There may be many of you that can do slightly more than that, and you should know by now your sort of capabilities and your speed of writing. So what I would like you to do is pick at least one short quotation from stanza 1, stanza 2, stanza 3, and stanza 4. Because we know this exam would like you to track systematically through the poem from start to finish. What you should then do on your paper that you're writing your notes for this lesson on is explode those quotations. Now, there's an example of exploding on the board. Now, actually, I haven't really followed my own advice here, and I've done quite a long quote. But, you know, the word that I would focus on here is wander and chartered. So, you know, what do those 2 words tell me about how Blake is presenting the City of London, and how do they link into his beliefs? So pause the video and give yourself the opportunity to quickly pick 4 short quotations, make some brief notes by exploding them. How does that quote present the City of London, and how could you link that to Blake's beliefs? So this is the question that you are going to be answering. How does Blake present the City of London in the poem? And it is worth 15 marks. So you will, we're not going to do that next lesson, we're going to do it today. Today you'll have 20 minutes, or you will give yourself 20 minutes at the end of this video to answer the question. Now, there are 3 assessment objectives in this exam. Assessment objective 1 is testing your critical understanding and knowledge and personal opinion to the poem. It's testing your ability to use quotes to support your views. AO2 is your ability to analyse that language, analyse that quote, and comment on form and structure, particularly if you're aiming for the top grades. AO3 is context. We know that context is relevant to these poems. So, what you may want to do, and this is entirely optional, is you may want to just spend a little bit of time making sure that with your quotations, you really know what you're going to write about. You may be able to identify subject terminology, even if you just Google it or something, type in the word to Google and it will tell you. You might want to think about the point that you're making about the City of London and how the word is suggesting that. So you don't have to do this stage if you want to, if you feel that your exploded quotes have enough detail, or you may well, again, just want to pause the video and make sure you have really made those notes. You're really clear on what you're going to write about that quotation. So pause the video and just make sure before you proceed with the lesson, you've got your quotations, you've fully exploded them and really thought about the effect of the language and what it tells you about the City of London. So we're going to look at two models because I'm aware that the whole year group are, hopefully, the whole year group are watching these lessons. And I know, as always, that there will be people aiming for a wide range of grades. Now, we know everybody should be aiming for at least a grade 4. That is your pass. That means you do not have to retake English at college. But we would hope that everybody is essentially aiming for grade 5s and above. So what I've got here is I've got a grade 5 model that we'll go through first. Then what I've got is a grade 7 model. We'll talk a little bit about the difference and you'll see some of the differences there. But when you come to do your 20-minute practice, feel free to have whatever is the more appropriate model for you up on your screen as you're writing. So again, we've got our 3 assessment objectives and you need to make sure that you are meeting all 3. When Blake uses the verb wander, he creates a hopeless tone because he is walking around with no purpose. So again, I've explained the effect of the word. It shows it's hopeless because he's got no purpose. He is hopeless because the streets and Thames are chartered and controlled by the government, which, as a romantic poet, Blake would have been against because the romantic poets believed in freedom. Sorry, I dropped the capital there. So we can see here that I've got my quotation. In this sense, I've chosen to do 2 words separately, and I have linked it in at the end of that mini PEE to how that links to Blake's belief. So I've got my AO1, my AO2, and my AO3 here. Blake also describes the Thames as chartered, which as a romantic poet, he would have been very against because they worshipped nature and believed that nature would always be more powerful than man. So again, I'm covering the 3 assessment objectives. So let's look a little bit at the grade 7 one and how this is a little bit different. The main thing you will see is it just goes into more depth, detail and insight. When Blake uses the verb wander, he instantly creates a hopeless tone. He is strolling about with no purpose. An explanation for this can be found through the repetition of the adjective chartered, a significant quotation as it demonstrates Blake's belief that the people of London are despondent due to their lack of freedom. Despondent just means sort of depressed and very passive and hopeless. A hopeless scenario for him and the reader. Every aspect of their lives are controlled, presumably by the government and other channels of established power. So we can just see that there's a little bit more depth in that analysis there. This is reinforced when Blake metaphorically describes the Thames as also being chartered. This is an anathema to Blake. Anathema simply means it's completely against what they believe. As the Thames is a natural resource that no one has the right to control, and as an early romantic poet, he would have felt that the river, like mankind, should be free-flowing. Flow furthers this philosophy as he juxtaposes its flowing nature to the people of London and uses it to remind them that their lack of freedom is not acceptable. So we can see that the reason why this would be a grade 7 or above compared to the other example is that it simply shows a deeper understanding and a deeper insight. Now, there is no shame if you are someone watching this video going, do you know what? I just want to get my grade 4 and my grade 5. That's my target grade. That's what I need. Absolutely go back to the video and look at this model to help you. But equally, there will be people who know that their target grade is a 7 or above, or that they want to try and aim to build to be writing something that is in a little bit more depth like this. So do please pick the one that is more appropriate for you as an individual. So the final thing I want to model before I allow you to get on and write your answer is an overview. Now, we know that in the literature exam, we always begin with a brief overview before we move on to analysing our quotes. An overview is important because you're establishing to the examiner your understanding of the poem as a whole. So, in London, Blake presents the city very negatively by focusing on the way the poor are treated and on how the citizens are controlled and restricted due to the sovereignty, I've got my word in there, of the government, monarchy and church. Now, it might be appropriate to add in a bit of context, but to be honest, there's so much contextual information, it's probably better and easier to link that in your mini PEs. What you don't want to do is just tag a load of context into your overview and you've got 10 minutes into your 20 minutes and you've barely started writing about the poem. Overview should always be a short summary, never any more than 2 sentences, particularly when you've only got 20 minutes to write about the poem as a whole. So again, if you need help starting off, please feel free to pause the video on this section and use that. So we know that the question is, as we see on this slide, how does Blake present the City of London in the poem? If you are somebody who struggles still with this sort of writing, this sort of assessment, I have put together on this slide a writing frame for you to use. Now, again, we are all in different positions here. We've all had different experiences in year 9 and before with how much mini PE writing we have done. So again, there is no shame in feeling that you need to use a writing frame at this stage of your education, particularly as you are having to do this at home without having your teacher there to help you if you get stuck. Equally, particularly if you are aiming for those high grades, you shouldn't really need to use this. So this writing frame is just here in case you get stuck and to enable you to get something written down for your teacher to mark. So what you can do is, as you're writing your assessment, you can pause the video here to allow you to get your assessment done. And we know that you are copying this out, and then where it says ... you are writing your own information. You can see here that I have picked out 4 quotations, one from each stanza. So if you are someone who has really struggled to find those quotations, you can use these. Equally, feel free to use these sentence starters, but just put your quotation in the place of the one I've done here. So what I'd like you to do now, and this is the end of the video, is to use whatever aspect of this video you need to help you, go back and pause it, but to now give yourself 20 minutes to answer the question, how does Blake present the City of London? When you have completed that, please send it in to your class teacher. The best way to submit this to us is on the Teams group through the assignment. Some students have already been doing this and uploading their work. That is ideal because it puts everyone's work in one place for your teacher to mark. And actually there is a box where I can give you immediate feedback. But do make sure that you do actually, if you're going to submit it via the Teams group on the assignment tab, do please make sure you actually upload the file or the image of your work. Some people have submitted things, but there isn't actually anything there for me to look at. If you are unable to get on your Office 365 account, so you can't access emails or Teams, please pop me an email, maybe through another account that you have, and I will do my best to get those login details to you. Alternatively, if everything I've just said completely baffles and confuses you, do feel free to just email it to me, to Mark, as well. So I'm hoping by the end of the day, I have got many of you pinging these to me, and then I can start marking them, or your class teacher can start marking them and then give you a little bit of feedback. I hope that this week has been okay. I know that it's really difficult for us all being back in this situation, but do please be assured that we as your teachers are always here via the email if you do need any help or any support or have any questions at all about work. Okay, I look forward to reading what you have done.